Aaron and Lila had always been the couple everyone admired. Married for 7 years, they shared a life that seemed almost perfect. 2 beautiful children, a cozy suburban home, and a bond that appeared unshakable. Aaron had always been madly in love with his wife, captivated not just by her beauty but by her warmth and ability to keep their family running smoothly. Lila was the glue that held everything together, the kind of mother who balanced work, playdates, and bedtime stories with an effortless grace. Aaron often felt lucky, even blessed, to have her by his side. Their life together wasn't without challenges. Like any marriage, they had weathered storms, including a particularly difficult period for Aaron a year ago. He had struggled with self-doubt and stress, often retreating into himself while relying too heavily on late-night drinks and the occasional joint to numb the pressure. But he had worked hard to pull himself out of that dark place, motivated by his love for Lila and their children. He believed they had emerged stronger, their love intact. It was a sunny Saturday when the first crack appeared. They were preparing for their daughter's birthday party, a lively celebration with balloons, laughter, and a house full of family and friends. As Lila stood beside Aaron in the kitchen, showing him photos on her phone, a message popped up on her screen. "I miss you more," it read. Aaron froze for a moment before casually asking who had sent it. Lila didn't flinch. She smiled and explained it was from a coworker she'd been helping through a tough time. Her explanation seemed plausible, and Aaron, trusting her implicitly, didn't think much more of it. The day unfolded beautifully, filled with joy and the sound of children's laughter, and the text was soon pushed to the back of his mind. The next evening, after the guests had left and the house was quiet, Lila approached Aaron with a seriousness in her eyes that he couldn't ignore. She asked if they could talk, her tone unusually heavy. They sat down in the living room, and Aaron braced himself, unsure of what was coming. Lila hesitated for a moment before taking a deep breath. "I need to tell you something," she began. "That text you saw yesterday, it wasn't from who I said it was." Aaron's heart sank as Lila confessed. Over the past 6 months, she explained, she had developed feelings for someone else. It hadn't started intentionally, she insisted. It was just a friendship at first, a connection that deepened over time. She admitted she had been feeling unfulfilled in their relationship during the time when Aaron had been struggling. She wasn't looking for it, she said, but she found comfort and a sense of emotional support in someone else. Aaron struggled to process her words. "Have you been intimate with him?" he asked, his voice trembling. Lila shook her head. "No, it's not physical. It's emotional. But I can't deny that it's real." She looked at him, tears in her eyes, and continued. "If I have feelings for someone else, I'm not sure that I should be married. It's not fair to you or me." The weight of her words crushed Aaron. For years, he had poured his heart and soul into their marriage, believing in the strength of their love. Now, in the span of a single conversation, everything he thought he knew was unraveling. He pleaded with her to reconsider, to think of their children, to remember the life they had built together. But Lila remained resolute. She wasn't sure she could let go of the feelings she had for this other person. The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Aaron sat there, staring at the woman he had loved for nearly a decade, unable to reconcile this version of her with the one he thought he knew. Lila reached out to hold his hand, but he pulled away, too hurt to accept her comfort. She stood and walked upstairs, leaving Aaron alone in the dimly lit living room. He stared at the family photos on the wall, the memories of vacations, birthdays, and milestones now tainted by the shadow of her confession. For hours he sat there, replaying her words in his mind. The love he had felt so sure of now felt fragile, like a thread fraying under the weight of betrayal. He thought of their children, blissfully unaware of the turmoil that was threatening to upend their world. He had always vowed to give them the stable, loving family he and Lila never had growing up. Now that promise felt like it was slipping through his fingers. When Aaron finally went to bed, the space beside him felt colder than it ever had before. Lila lay facing the wall, her breathing steady but distant. For the first time in their marriage, Aaron felt completely alone, unsure of what the future would hold. In the weeks following Lila's confession, Aaron found himself navigating a storm of emotions he couldn't control. Shock gave way to anger, and anger melted into a deep sadness that seemed to shadow him everywhere he went. He struggled to reconcile the woman he had adored for so many years with the stranger she had revealed herself to be. Lila, meanwhile, remained distant. She assured him she wanted to take time to reflect on what she truly wanted, but her actions told a different story. She spent long hours at work, kept her phone guarded, and avoided conversations that strayed too close to the heart of their problems. Aaron couldn't stop himself from trying to piece together the mystery of Lila's emotional affair. The thought of someone else occupying her heart gnawed at him. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the children were asleep, he began combing through their phone records, searching for clues. He didn't want to be this person, paranoid, suspicious, desperate, but the need for answers overpowered his pride. That was when he noticed the pattern: repeated calls and texts to a single number, sometimes late at night or during moments when she had claimed to be elsewhere. His heart sank as he realized the number belonged to someone he knew, the coach of their son's baseball team. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Coach Brian was someone Aaron had spoken to countless times on the sidelines of games and practices. He was friendly, charismatic, and well-liked by the other parents. The idea that this man had been the one to draw Lila away from him was almost unbearable. Aaron confronted Lila one evening, his voice shaking as he laid out what he had discovered. For a moment she said nothing, her expression unreadable. Then, she sighed and admitted it was true. Coach Brian was the man she had been emotionally involved with. Aaron's world tilted further off its axis. "How could you?" he demanded, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. "How could you betray our family like this?" Lila's response was maddeningly detached. She explained that Brian had been there for her during a time when Aaron wasn't, that he had made her feel seen and appreciated in ways she hadn't felt in years. "It's not about you being a bad husband," she said. "It's about me needing something more." Her words cut deep. Aaron had spent the past year working to be a better partner, pulling himself out of his dark place for the sake of their family. To hear that it still wasn't enough left him feeling hollow. He tried to reason with her, to remind her of the life they had built together, but she seemed unwilling, or unable, to meet him halfway. Lila insisted the relationship with Brian had ended, but Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't telling him the whole truth. Their arguments became more frequent and intense. Lila accused Aaron of clinging to the past, of refusing to let go and move forward. Aaron, in turn, accused her of rewriting their history to justify her actions. The once loving connection they had shared was now a battlefield, their home filled with tension that neither of them could escape. Aaron began to notice small changes in Lila: new clothes, a bracelet she wore every day, even though she couldn't give a clear answer about where it had come from. She seemed different, distant, as if part of her was already somewhere else. Despite everything, Aaron wanted to believe there was still hope for their marriage. He suggested therapy, begged Lila to reconsider, and tried to create moments where they could reconnect as a couple. They had moments of closeness, brief flickers of the love they had once shared, but they were always followed by more distance, more arguments. Every time he thought they were making progress, something would happen to remind him of the betrayal that loomed over them. One evening, while scrolling through the shared family cloud account, Aaron discovered a folder of photos that Lila had forgotten to hide. His stomach churned as he opened it. There were pictures of Brian, his face, his smile, even his bare torso taken in places Aaron recognized, including the family beach condo they had shared for years. Among the images were intimate selfies of Lila, ones she had clearly sent to Brian. They were photos Aaron had never seen, moments she had never shared with him. It was the final blow. He couldn't unsee what he had found, couldn't ignore the evidence of how far her betrayal had gone. Lila had lied to him, not just once but repeatedly, and he could no longer pretend their marriage could survive the weight of it all. As he sat in the darkened room, staring at the photos on his screen, Aaron felt something inside him shift. The sadness that had consumed him for weeks began to harden into resolve. He loved Lila, but he couldn't keep sacrificing himself for a relationship she no longer seemed to want. When Aaron confronted Lila with what he had found, she reacted with anger rather than remorse. She accused him of invading her privacy, of digging up things that should have been left in the past. "We agreed to move forward," she said, her voice sharp and defensive. "Why can't you just let this go?" Aaron couldn't believe her audacity. "Because you haven't been honest with me," he shot back. "How am I supposed to move forward when you're still holding on to him?" The argument escalated, each of them throwing accusations and frustrations at the other until their voices were hoarse. By the end of it, Aaron knew there was no coming back from this. The love he had fought so hard to preserve had been eclipsed by betrayal, and the woman he had once thought of as his soulmate now felt like a stranger. For the first time since Lila's confession, Aaron began to seriously consider what life might look like without her. Aaron couldn't ignore the truth any longer. The woman he had built his life around, the mother of his children, was no longer the partner he had fallen in love with. After weeks of sleepless nights and endless emotional torment, he made the decision he had been avoiding. He contacted a lawyer to discuss his options, determined to protect himself and his children from the chaos Lila's choices had brought into their lives. It was a step he never thought he would take, but he realized he had to stop clinging to the remnants of a marriage that no longer existed. Lila's behavior only reinforced his decision. Despite her insistence that her relationship with Brian had ended, she continued to act in ways that eroded any trust Aaron had left. She would spend hours locked away with her phone, snapping at Aaron whenever he asked who she was talking to. She canceled plans with him at the last minute, citing excuses that felt increasingly hollow. The bracelet she wore every day, a matching piece to one Brian had, Aaron now knew, seemed like a constant reminder of her unwillingness to fully let go of her affair. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning. Aaron had planned to spend the day with the kids, taking them to the park and out for ice cream, hoping to create some normalcy amidst the turmoil. But when he woke up, he found Lila had already taken the children out without telling him. Frustrated and hurt, he decided to use the time to clear his head with a long walk. As he paced the neighborhood, his phone buzzed with a message from an old friend offering support. It was a small gesture, but it reminded Aaron that he wasn't entirely alone. When Lila returned later that afternoon, Aaron was calm but distant. She seemed unfazed by his cold demeanor, brushing past him with barely a glance. That evening, while the kids were playing upstairs, Aaron sat her down to talk. He told her plainly that he couldn't keep living like this, that the constant lies, the secrecy, and the lack of accountability were tearing him apart. Lila listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she simply shrugged. "I don't know what you want me to say," she said flatly. "You've made it clear you don't trust me, and I don't see how we fix that." Her indifference stung more than Aaron expected. He had hoped, even after everything, that she might fight for their marriage, that she would at least show some remorse or a willingness to change. Instead, her words confirmed what he already feared. She wasn't invested in rebuilding what they had lost. She had already emotionally checked out, and Aaron was left holding the pieces alone. The final blow came just days later. Aaron had been trying to follow his lawyer's advice, staying in the house for the sake of their children and avoiding unnecessary conflict. But one morning, on a whim, he decided to check the family beach condo. Something about Lila's behavior the night before had left him suspicious, and he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she wasn't being truthful. When he arrived at the condo, his heart sank. Parked in the driveway was Brian's truck, unmistakable with its custom decals. Aaron hesitated for a moment, his hands trembling as he debated whether to confront them. But he knew he needed to see it for himself, to erase any lingering doubts about what was really happening. He entered the condo quietly, his pulse pounding in his ears. Inside, he found undeniable evidence: Brian's belongings scattered in the living room, an open drink on the counter, and most painfully, Lila emerging from the master bedroom. She froze when she saw him, her face a mix of shock and defiance. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone defensive. Aaron didn't answer. Instead, he snapped a few photos of the scene, his hands shaking as he documented the betrayal. "This is it, Lila," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "We're done." She didn't try to stop him as he walked out the door, his chest heavy with a mixture of anger and grief. Back at home, Aaron began putting his plan into action. He contacted his lawyer, provided the evidence he had gathered, and started the process of separating their lives. Lila's initial reaction was to blame him, accusing him of giving up too easily and refusing to move past her mistakes. She even claimed that if he had been more communicative or forgiving, things might have been different. But Aaron didn't let her words sway him. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of clarity. This wasn't his fault. He had given her every opportunity to rebuild their marriage, and she had chosen not to. The days that followed were some of the hardest Aaron had ever faced. He moved through the motions of daily life, focusing on his children and trying to shield them from the turmoil. He leaned on friends and family for support, opening up about what had happened despite the shame he initially felt. Slowly, he began to see a path forward, not the life he had envisioned, but one where he could find peace and maybe, eventually, happiness again. Lila continued to reach out, sometimes with apologies, sometimes with anger, and sometimes with pleas to try again. But Aaron had made up his mind. The love he had for her was still there, buried under layers of hurt, but it wasn't enough to keep him in a marriage that had become toxic. He deserved better, and so did his children. As he stood in the backyard one evening, watching his kids play under the fading light, he felt a flicker of hope. The life he had built with Lila was over, but a new chapter was beginning, and for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face it.